Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Trauma Informed Care Task Force. Today is Thursday, August 19th. As a reminder, these meetings are recorded and will be played on YouTube. Also, welcome to any new folks who are checking this out for the first time. Very, very good to be with you all today. I'm Zeke Cohen, co-chair of this task force with my great partner, Tisha Edwards, and we're really excited to see you all here today. I'm going to turn it over to Anne for our round the horn, and we will go from there.
Awesome. It's so good to see you all. Tonight, we are going to be mostly in pairs, and we're going to just be answering the question, when did you first realize that healing was important to you? And so that could be your own personal healing. It could be thinking about healing a community. I'll let people interpret that however they would like. And let me put that in the chat just real quick. Well, so I've got breakout rooms that are also happening. So the question again is, when did you first realize the importance of healing? All right. And I am going to go ahead and open up some breakout rooms. I'm like assigning people like crazy. So I'm going to open those up. It should be pairs of people, and we will regroup here in 5 minutes. So you'll have 2 minutes or so in case you want to share a little bit more. So I am opening breakout rooms now. All right, looks like we've got a handful of people in this room. So I'll go first. My name is Ann Coy. I am Healing City Coordinator, and I think I most was aware of the need for healing as a teacher. And as I recognized the impact that so much trauma was having on my students, was able to see collectively why healing was necessary and why individually healing was necessary. And a lot of that still drives a lot of my work today. And Maggie, I'm going to go to you next, and I'm going to try and assign some other people into other rooms.
And hi, thanks. I think I was figuring out some tech stuff right as you were given the prompt. So, and it's thinking about why healing, or kind of a moment when you realized healing was necessary.
Yep, exactly.
Awesome. I spent about 12 years of my career working at Teach for America in Baltimore, and had during that time the opportunity to work with just a phenomenal group of Black women in Baltimore. And I think there were moments when I feel really privileged to have been let into a very vulnerable moment in which they shared their sort of personal pain, I think in a way that that obviously as a white woman I had not experienced personally. And to understand, to sort of be present and be witness to that kind of pain, and to pain that has been generational, I think was a really powerful and painful thing for me to witness as a friend and a colleague.
Yeah. Thanks, Maggie. We're glad to have you. I think Tisha is maybe not quite on, but I don't want to skip you, Tisha, if you are there. So if you'd like to go, Tisha, we'd love to hear from you, but I also am not sure if you're there yet. Okay. Similarly, Kevin and Steve, I know I've assigned you other rooms. I don't know if there's a technical glitch here, but we'd love to hear from you if you're here. Kevin? And Steve. Okay. I am going to help. Someone needs some help in a breakout room, so I'm going to be right back. I think I can actually message them again here. Welcome to the caller. Who have we got calling in tonight? Hi, Donna.
We're having some technical difficulties. Destiny can't hear, so it felt kind of awkward being in that group. Just she and I, and she couldn't hear. So I'm here.
Okay, I'm going to get her the phone number so that she can hear and call in. So I'm going to turn off camera and I'm going to bring some people back.
Okay.
So give me just a minute. All right, I know some of you had tech issues there. There were some people who were messaging saying, I can't get in my room, and some people saying, I'm in my room, but I can't hear. It's the joys of Zoom. But thank you for sharing, and I'm gonna give it back to Zeke.
Awesome. All right. Great to see you all again. All right. So we are going to do some get to know yous. And tonight, we are going to start with Destiny Philpott, one of our amazing youth members of the task force.
We're not going to start with Destiny because she's having some tech issues. So I'm going to get her the call-in number.
Just kidding. All right. Great. So we are going to start with Shauna Murray Brown.
Okay, great. Do I have sharing capability? Can I have it?
You
Oh,
should.
you do.
Yeah, you should be able to share.
I think you're right. All right, y'all. So I'm a PowerPoint person, but I have time for all of that. So I am going to share a clip of a film project I was a part of through PBS, and then I will talk a little bit about it. And hopefully y'all can see it. Can you see? Yeah? Okay, good.
Yeah.
So there's a project called, Mysteries of Mental Illness, Decolonizing Mental Health that PBS is still like airing presently, and I had the opportunity to participate. And so I'm gonna play the whole video and then I'm gonna talk back, for about 50 seconds after that. All right. Maybe. My name is Shauna Murray Brown. I am a native Baltimorean. I'm an integrative psychotherapist and a liberation-focused community healer. My work is to help Black folk and those that care for them remember how to heal themselves. I work from the premise that Black folks especially, and though Indigenous folks and other folks of color come from a lineage history of having natural ways of caring for, of nurturing, and of healing. Systems or isms like racism and capitalism have made money off of our ongoing oppression and us not knowing that we have these innate powers. I could say individually, our reaction to and the generational harms that have been passed on and has transformed into a culture, not even having the ability to ask the right questions to know how to gain access to this information. The way that we've been trained is so Eurocentric and is grounded in Eurocentric values. It makes sense that even the practitioners would feel like, you know, if I could fix the thing, then it would be better. In the beginning, I was just using the usual evidence-based practice models, but I felt that it was consistently missing the mark based off of what I was hearing from folks within the community. The turning point for me would be when my brother was murdered. He was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia while he was incarcerated. I had dreams about my brother being murdered before he actually was. I thought that it was residue from seeing so many hashtags of Black men and women and children being killed. And so the first part of that is that there's seldom space in mental health care in the way that we are addressing these traumatic experiences to contend with the multiplicity of experience. After I returned to work after grieving my brother, and what I felt as a professional was that I had to make a decision of my profession or my personal life and family and lived experience, or how I was going to advocate against the system on behalf of my brother. I had this really challenging experience of feeling that the mental health system was not created for Black folks that were actually enduring systems of oppression, because it didn't allow me to show up as my full self. And it required that I dehumanize myself, to treat myself as an object in order to hold space for the folks that I was serving. But I did decide that I would be out of alignment, out of right relationship, if I did not use my voice to talk about the harm and the systemic harms done to my brother. And so that early stage experience of having to make that decision and making it out of fear, while being surrounded by professionals who did not know how to engage with me, their colleague, their therapist, they are the instructors. That's when I started to shift and decide that I was not going to be silent about how the culture of mental health care permeated and upheld systems of racism and white supremacy by virtue of the way that we're trained. How do we ensure that what's happening in the therapy space is actually raising critical consciousness? We can advocate, we can be anti-racist in our individual practice, and we can do that in a way that will elicit a level of individual success or individual freedom for the folks that we're holding space for. So that was really quick. Some things I want to share about that is that my experience even in recording that piece was really traumatizing, because PBS cut out very important aspects that were controversial. The significance of paranoid schizophrenia is because my brother said that correctional officers were trying to kill him, not that he was killed by an inmate. And they omitted the later federal trial that uplifted those actual facts into the court system. And so I think when I'm thinking about why this work is so important, it's also important for us to center decolonization so that we could be really clear that when we are taking snapshots of people's stories, we're not further dehumanizing and furthering a system that's really painful and disrespectful. And so I see my role, I'm getting emotional, but I see my role in this process in challenging and making sure that we do not continue to dehumanize Black and brown people in our work. And that's all I'm gonna say because I can't talk when I'm trying to cry. Gosh, I mean, my favorite color is yellow. I really like gifts. And, you know, I also like strawberries. That's it, y'all. I will share the link to the series for all of you to view. There are several other, there's a collection of other stories like that.
Thank you so much, Shauna, for sharing that with us, for your leadership and your vulnerability. Amen to strawberries. It's a great fruit. Pomegranates too. But no, seriously, thank you for all that you do and for being on this journey with all of us. It was a really powerful piece. And
absolutely. Thanks for
appreciate
inviting me.
Of course.
Nika, don't run down PBS. Yeah.
All right. Well, again, thank you to Shauna for her powerful story. Is Destiny on the line? I know she was having some technical difficulties.
So her phone, she can't hear us. And on the phone, she was like, well, I can call in, but I can't hear her on the phone. So I think we're gonna have to get her the next go round.
Darn. Okay. No problems. All right. So we are now going to turn to our diversity, equity, and inclusion portion of the task force meeting. I think Monica's presenting today. Really excited for what she's going to add. Fariha, do you want to share anything before we turn it over to Monica?
I just want to say welcome, everyone. Thank you so much to Monica for presenting today. Monica is a brilliant human being, and she's just doing great advocacy, especially for immigrant populations. So I'm going to turn it over to Monica to share with us tonight. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I was going to say happy Friday, but if you're in that mood, happy Friday, pre-Friday. I am in that mood today. I am really nervous of presenting. This was a very triggering presentation to prepare for me, and I told Faria about that. So I'll do my best. Feel free to interrupt if you think something is incorrect, or if you want to contribute with your experiences. I tried to make this presentation very informative. As I said, it's very triggering for me, so I didn't want to get too emotional during the presentation. So I'm gonna, I don't know if I can share screen. Okay. So let me play with this. Hopefully it will work. Do you all see a PowerPoint presentation? Great.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. So today I'm going to talk about xenophobia and trauma. Again, you all know my name, Monica Guerrero Vasquez. I'm she, her. And some of the things that I was just talking to some youth today, and I was trying to talk to them about racism. And then they were sharing some of their experiences. And then I said, do you know what xenophobia is? And they looked at me weird, like saying, we're just talking about something else. Like, what are you asking? Why are you asking that? So then I thought, oh, great. Then I feel more reassured to share this PowerPoint today. So let's start first with definitions. Some of you may already be familiar with this, some of you may not. Xenophobia is a combination of Greek words. Xeno means foreigner or stranger, and phobia is a fear. So that literally means fear of foreigners. And that's something that is not learned, that is not in us, it's something that we learn through others. The American Psychological Association notes that xenophobia is actually a form of negative prejudice against a national or ethnic group. And in regards to racism, it's in a system of oppression, it's the belief that there is one race that is superior to others. So skin color and origin can be factors, of course, of discrimination. And for example, you can be racist and xenophobic. Racism and xenophobia develop over time, and both are caused by systematic oppression of the other, promoting attitudes and policies that perpetuate that. So we live in a country that is well known for being a nation of immigrants, a country that welcomes people from all over the world. However, the US has a history of xenophobia that was supported by policies. And this is true for other forms of oppression within racism. So I'm just gonna go over, as I said, my presentation is gonna be very informative. So I'm gonna go over some key highlights to our history that really bring us to where we are today. The history of xenophobia is documented way back in the 19th century and even before that. For example, in 1882, the Chinese Exclusion Act purpose was to eradicate Chinese immigration. So they suspended immigration of Chinese individuals for 10 years, and Chinese immigrants were ineligible for naturalization. It was enacted by President Chester Arthur in 1882. Very soon after that, the Immigration Restriction League was created. It was a group of scholars graduated from alums from Harvard, a lawyer, a climatologist, and an attorney. They created this group with the idea that Southern and Eastern European immigrants were inferior. And they literally said in their description that they had attributions of diminished capacities. They were not alone in this journey, and after a lot of pressure, the Congress agreed with them in 1917 when it was approved to limit immigration from countries in Southern and Eastern Europe, and more broadly promoted racial hierarchy, and the expansion of groups like the Ku Klux Klan was definitely alarming, as we all know. But that didn't stop there. In 1920, the 1920s was, we had a lot of other examples of policies that were xenophobic, like the national origin quotas, that with the purpose of continue reducing immigration from Southern and Eastern Europe and eradicating Asian immigration. And then we all know after the World War II, the Supreme Court barred the Japanese becoming US citizens and incarcerated more than 100,000 Japanese Americans after the attacks of Pearl Harbor. And we are still in the 1900s, so with the crisis, the economic crisis, the collapse of 1929, that severely hit the country. In the 1930s, the mission was to eliminate Mexicans. So Mexican Americans were deported from the US. And it followed with the creation of the Border Patrol. And during that period, 1913, 1923, there was a restriction to non-citizens from owning properties. And up until then, Mexicans were restricted to pathways to citizenship. I'm not going to stop there. I'm going to go a little bit farther in our history as we move in our history line. The Immigration Act of 1965 continued to prioritize European immigration and restricted Mexicans or general people of color. And not long ago, only 1984, the first detention center was open. It was private, and most of the detention centers in the country are private facilities that are run by the government, by the Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And there are 200 across the country. And according to ICE, as of August last year, there are 3.3 million immigrants who are in removal procedures, and about 100,000 of those are monitored very closely. That means they probably use those bracelets that they put on their ankles. Fast forward, more recently, we all know about the history of xenophobia and racism from our federal government. The Muslim ban was approved and prohibited the entrance to the U.S. to primarily Muslim people from Muslim countries and their relatives, and Syrian refugees were indefinitely banned to enter the country. And in that period, there was an expansion of ICE. They claim to be one of the largest federal agencies in the government after the federal defense. So that speaks a lot about where we are with xenophobia in our country. In the past, up until last year, more than 57, and these are official numbers, more than 57 million immigrants have been deported. And all of them were poor or for countries that by virtue of race, ethnicity, and class are seen as inferior. And that expands to countries with indigenous populations or countries with where slaves were traded. That doesn't mean that there has not been change. There is some hope sometimes, and I'm not going to expand too much on the policies that have been enacted to remedy the impact of this xenophobic policies in the past. But I just wanted to mention that it is important and crucial to understand the history, our history, to be able to prevent the future actions and policies that go on the same route. So we're not there yet, and just as we were mentioning with Maria before, there is still a long journey to walk. There is some action, there is some advocate and some advocacy, and the organizing is super important to make our leaders understand that we need to take action to really make our nation a nation of immigrants. So in summary of all this history from today's class, xenophobia is the negative prejudice against nationality and ethnicity, and it's associated with assumptions of superiority. So xenophobia and racism are closely and intensely intertwined. We cannot separate one from the other. And it definitely sees the idea that there are the poor is bad, and there are good immigrants versus bad immigrants. And xenophobia builds upon the categorizing and stereotyping individuals based on their religion, based on their origin, their culture, and economic background. And it certainly is not unique to our country, and it evolves. There are times we probably see it now that communities that have passed through the history of xenophobic policies and attacks, settled communities tend to participate as instigators of policies to eliminate new immigration. But how does xenophobia look like now? So I have two very short clips with audio, and if you allow me, I'm gonna share them quickly. Can you all see the YouTube video? Okay, now I hope you can hear it. Can you hear it? No?
So Monica, when you share your screen, down, I think in the left-hand corner, you can also click share audio.
Oh, share sound.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That.
I'm gonna share it.
Authorities in the Bay Area here in California say they've seen an uptick in recent weeks in violent attacks against Asian Americans. It's adding to the already large number of incidents since the pandemic hit the U.S. almost a year ago. And it's prompting law enforcement to take some new action. And we want to warn you, some of the video we're about to show is quite disturbing. A string of violent attacks against elderly Asian Americans has law enforcement on alert. This surveillance video capturing an alleged assailant in California violently shoving an 84-year-old Thai American man to the ground. He died of his injuries days later. Authorities say it's not currently being prosecuted as a hate crime, and the suspect has pleaded not guilty. A 91-year-old man was pushed over in Oakland's Chinatown. The motivation has not yet been determined.
In a 12-day period, there were 18 incidents of violence committed against Asian individuals, many of whom were seniors.
The spike in
So that's one example, and I'm going to share another one very quickly. That video ends with informing the audience that that English is not official language of the U.S. and that the U.S. in fact doesn't have an official language. So I'm gonna continue just to wrap up with
very ignorant and disrespectful. Have a great day.
Can you all see the PowerPoint? Great. And then there, I put also a couple of headlines from the news from this past few years, like the Muslim ban that I just mentioned, and some of the quotes from our former president referring to Mexicans or immigrants in general. So what is the impact of seeing these every day or being victim of hate, of xenophobia? How does that impact our lives? And Shona just mentioned that briefly, and really that gave me chills because I can relate a lot to that, how you feel, and especially how it grows inside you and how impotent and not being able to recognize and speak up makes you feel throughout your life. So in response, you hide and question your own identity As an immigrant or refugee, you don't disclose where you're from, and of course, you never disclose your immigration status. You also you feel ashamed of your language, and there are many examples, and I'm sure you have heard this before, like this person doesn't speak the language. And when we refer to this person doesn't speak English, so it's like we're putting, in the context of colonization, we're putting English as the language of reference. So even language can make a big difference. Individuals who are victims of xenophobia, they also tend to negate or don't recognize their journey as a valid human experience, and that dehumanizes their existence. And in the context of mental health, that translates to chronic stress and fear, constant fear, especially of deportation or being recognized or not being accepted. The anxiety that's constant about not fitting in, and that not being able to stay and not being able to be with your family, and just the anxiety of not being or feeling that you're part of this society. And more chronically for individuals who are victims of hate acts, like the ones that we saw in the videos, PTSD. So what can we do as a collective and as individuals to support and to end xenophobia? On the individual and interpersonal context, is creating awareness about race, racism, and xenophobia, and talk about race and racism, which is not an easy topic, but it is necessary. Providing safe spaces to share experiences is important with individuals who have been through your same experience, but also others and allies who can understand and support your journey, and promote accomplishments and promotion of immigrant communities, recognize their accomplishments and success, supporting local businesses, supporting small initiatives from the community, and more at large at a population-based, institutional and structural. I think this relates a lot with some of the efforts that we have heard in previous sessions, and in policies that criminalize newly arrived individuals, advocate for more humane immigration era, where immigrants are treated like humans and not criminals, and remedy inequities that are constructed by historic discriminatory policies like the ones that we have listed before, and also try to build spaces for collaboration among communities of color, because we tend to create this horizontal discrimination that separates all of us when we all have the same monster to fight. So that was all that I have to share with you today. It seems that we have time, so I'll be happy to open up to comments or questions or thoughts that you may have, particularly in how to address this issue. I appreciate your time and that you listen, and I would love to connect and talk more about this. Thank you.
Please give a huge, huge virtual round of applause to Monica for that awesome presentation. Thank you for your leadership and for just speaking out for what's right consistently. And I remember my first week in office under the previous president, having two guys get deported, going to get their medicine out of Walgreens, and then 2 weeks later having a dad drop off his kid at school and get picked up by ICE, and just the terror and fear and anxiety that it spread all throughout Southeast Baltimore, and just horrible, led to more crime, more violence against our immigrant community, and still to this day, 5 years later, I think folks still feel it. So thank you, Monica, for what you're doing. Does anyone have maybe one question?
I have a question. Thank you again, Monica, for the amazing work that you do. I'd like to know if you had to give guidance to folks who already think they're doing enough. For folks who think that like collaboration is enough, are there gaps that you've identified, particularly institutional within Baltimore City, that it feels like we aren't seeing? I know I had contacted you about Star Trek. We've been doing a lot of work. We definitely need to do more in populations, and expanding access through language, through where we are, through understanding affirmation in those communities. Um, where do we get started? What's a good space for that?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. I wish I can be a connector for others and a bridge for different communities and different groups. That's my dream. I'm still learning a lot from this in my own healing process. I think a good way to start working with the community is being part of it. Sometimes we tend to, and again, going back to the colonization idea, we tend to think that because we know a little bit of something, we have the solution to everything. So what I feel there is a need, especially for communities of color in Baltimore, is have a more comprehensive and holistic approach when we have solutions, and not just say this is only for this group or only for that group. Because an example is the response for COVID-19 came very late for non-English speakers. It was not appropriate. It was not culturally relevant. It was not language sensitive. So it came late. It came like in phases, like, oh, we forget this. Oh, we forget that. We have hundreds of people out who need help and don't speak English. So I think it's creating like combos that are customized and community and human centered, and we forget sometimes that it's not easy. But I guess like being open and like starting conversations with different groups or ethnicities or minorities in the city is a good start. I had the honor to have a couple of leaders from the African American community talking about race and racism in Baltimore City to our youth programs from newly arrived youth and immigrants, and they have not had that conversation, and creating a common language is very important too. To that extent, I think being part of the community and bringing people to where they need to be, or being part of them and listening to them, I think are important pieces to address these gaps and these inequities. I don't have one answer. I think it's like a lot of things. It's like leaving that, and I know you know what I mean. So it's not an easy answer.
Yeah, that fully answered my question. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Monica. Really, really great presentation. I also just want to acknowledge your support of the Children's Cabinet. We depend on you so much in terms of our work with youth and addressing trauma in that community. So just really appreciate you being everywhere and supporting everything to make Baltimore a better city. So great presentation, and thank you for everything that you do. You give so much time and energy, and you have so much heart. And every time you speak, my heart grows bigger. So thank you for that. So now it's time for us to get to work. I always feel like I'm the person on the agenda who's like the work, like, Tisha, give us the work we have to do, which is not necessarily the fun part. But I am excited that we are now progressing from creating action statements to creating action plans. So we are now moving into phase 2 of building out a comprehensive set of recommendations from the Trauma-Informed Care Task Force. So I want to give us a presentation, lay the groundwork. I want to make sure we have an opportunity for a question and answer. And then I think that we're going to move from the presentation about action planning and go into our committees and start to do a little bit of work around action planning. But this is what we're going to be doing together over the next couple of months. And I want to make sure that everybody has the information that they need in order to be successful. Anne, are you okay to present for me tonight? Thank you. Great. Okay, so as I said, we are making progress and we've already met one major milestone. Step one was to create our action statements. And now we are moving into action planning. And today, August 19th, we're going to begin to work on our SMART goals and recommendations. September 16th, we're going to do a check-in on our action planning, everyone's doing, provide feedback, very similar to the way that we provided feedback on the action statements. October 21st, we need to all be ready to present our near final draft of our various action plans for each committee. And then November 4th, we'll actually go into step 3, and step 3 will be timelines, budgets, and other details to support implementation. And there will be an expansion of the template that you're given today when we're ready to move to step 3. And by January 20th, we want to make sure that we have great, robust plan. It all comes together and we have a set of recommendations on behalf of the task force. So that's kind of the roadmap and general timeline. I also just want to say that these are very fluid. Zeke and I are very interested in making sure everybody is set up for success. So if we need to make adjustments, we will. But this gives us a general kind of framework of the timeline that we're on to create the final recommendations. Next slide. All right, and I just want to remind everyone about cunning. We are going to build on the committee action statement. Everybody, we spent a lot of time working that through. It is completely okay for you to go back and refine your action statement once you're in step 2. So don't feel like you're in step 2 and then you say, you know what, I think we need to be more clear. I think we need to make an adjustment. It's totally okay to do that. And that's why we call everything near final, because this is an iterative process and it's an organic process. And the more you learn and the more we collaborate and the more we talk through these issues, we understand that things may change. We want this process to be collaborative with time dedicated to fact finding. And we need the planning, which are going to be your goals and your projects, to tie back to system change work that promotes healing, resiliency, and addresses structural racism. Those are recurring themes in our work. Those are, at the end of the day, our shared goal is about healing, it's about resiliency, and it's about breaking down structural racism. When we go to create these goals, we want them to be SMART goals. SMART goals are specific, they're measurable, they're achievable, they're relevant, and they're time bound. This is how we're going to make sure that we're holding ourselves accountable, that the public can hold us accountable to the recommendations that we ultimately create. And we're going to always provide templates and guidance to assist with organizing and sharing the recommendations. We want to give you a framework. We don't want you to have to think about, does this need to be written? How many be cited? We want to try to give you that type of guidance so that you can really we can use our time together to be focused on the big ideas and problem solving. Next slide, Anne. All right, so as I said, good news, we've already finished step one, where we created action statements for each committee. So we want to pat ourselves on the back for that. And now we're moving into step two. And step two is where we're going to develop the SMART goals and recommended projects to support the action statement. And we're launching that today. The task, very specifically, that you have in front of you is each trauma-informed care task force committee will develop up to 5 SMART goals that will drive implementation of the committee action statement. So you have an action statement. Now you are now going to start, like, how do you implement the action statement? The action statement was the how. The action statement is the what. The SMART goals is the how. The action statement is the what, and the SMART goals is the how. How do we get this work done? Once the goals are established, the committee will create supporting recommended projects that will achieve the stated goals. So I'm going to give you some examples of what we mean by that. Next slide. So these are just examples and that I came up with because I'm on the youth programs committee. So our mandate is determining supports for young people across Baltimore to address trauma. That's the mandate. That's the call to hear our action statement. Our action statement, which we've reviewed with the task force before, is traumatic experiences can lead to chronic physical, behavioral, and emotional health concerns. While the causes are complex, research shows that traumas are introduced and intensified by living in underinvested communities, being exposed to substance abuse, and enduring systemic structural racism. For Baltimore to heal, we must create spaces where our youth can safely imagine and inhabit their futures. The goal of the Trauma and Youth Committee is to make Baltimore a more empathetic community that is supportive, inclusive, and safe for young Baltimoreans as they practice healthy self-determination. Our goal is to design opportunities for our youth to become thriving adults. So that's the lane we're in. And within that action statement, you can see that there are very specific goals even embedded in that action statement. There are triggers in the action statement that will help us to focus the goals. So now that we have an action statement, the youth committee needs to create 5 goals. So I've given you an example of one goal. This has not been cleared by my committee. I am not committing to this, but it just gives you an example. So an example of a goal based on the action statement is that we want to increase safe spaces where children and youth can explore their interests and develop a healthy curiosity for their future possibilities. That's the goal. Now, how would we action statement? So the committee then will determine what are some key actions that we can take. What are some projects that we would like to see happen in Baltimore? And I want to clarify a couple of things as it relates to this. It's very important for the task force to understand that what we're trying to do is ultimately build out a plan of recommendations of how our city can be, again, healing, resilient, and address structural racism. That is not something that is just the responsibility of city government. That is all of our collective responsibility. And so we're looking for solutions and projects and actions that are far-reaching, that are comprehensive, and it's not just, okay, the city should do this, or the mayor's office should do this, or BPD should do that. That's not the approach. City government is a partner. And so some of these actions will be very centered around key projects within city government.
but it should also be community-based. It can be faith-based. It can be neighborhood-based. Like we want to galvanize the entire city in this effort. And we want to have a plan that brings everybody to action. So when you create your goals and when you create your recommended projects or recommended actions or recommended policies, it's not a list of things that Baltimore City should do. It's thinking about what we all can do to be a part of this process for our city. I also want to clarify that I've said we can have up to 5 goals, so no more than 5. You can have 3, you can have 4, you can have 5. I hope you have more than 1, and I hope you have more than 2. I think we need to all be somewhere between 3 on the low end, 5 on the high end. And then within your goals, you can have these projects, and you can have as many of those as you think is appropriate. Again, I think you want to be on the low end, 2 to 3, on the high end, 5 to 7, right? So 1 action statement, 5 goals, and think if you have 5 goals and you had 5 actions within those 5 goals, that's 25 key actions to support 1, recommendations coming out of 1 committee. So you have a lot of room to be innovative, but we also want to be actionable, right? We want to have a plan that we can do and that we all believe in. So for the youth program, I have my action statement, check. I have 1 of the 5 goals. We're going to try to get to 5. And then I've put 2 projects, actions, or policy changes, any of those things that we need to do to achieve the goal. So I've listed 2 strategies, some people would call them, projects or actions to support my goal. This is how I'm going to increase safe spaces for children and youth. One way that we need to do it is that we need to increase funding for recreation centers to include century facility design, fee-based partnerships that assist with increased participation across genders, age groups, etc. Right? So that's one way that we would recommend to achieve this goal that's in support of this action statement. The second project or strategy or key action is that we would recommend to engage youth in the placemaking process of parks and other public spaces so that young people can contribute to the community and develop a strong sense of ownership and connection to the city's public spaces. And let me tell you what that meant for me when I came up with this example. I was thinking about the skate park in Hamden and how so many young people gravitate to that space. We don't have any safety there. I live in that skate park, and it's like a really fun gathering space for young people. How do we have more of those kinds of spaces in Baltimore? People talk a lot about young people in the Inner Harbor. Why is there this tension about young people being in the Inner Harbor? Is there something we can do through some type of placemaking strategy where we bring young people to the table and we bring business community to the table and we find ways to make the harbor a place where young people can go, they're comfortable, they feel safe, it's meant for them to be there, and there isn't this tension that comes up every year when it's like kids are going down to the harbor as if they don't have a right to be there. So that's an example of a successful placemaking strategy that we've already done in Baltimore, the Hamden Skate Fair. Kids they don't feel safe, they don't feel honored. How do we create more public spaces for them to be safe and to gather and to do what's completely age appropriate? So that's an example of a youth action plan, goal, and then supporting strategies for the action plan. I want to do one more example. Next slide. So this is a really audacious group. And this is the decolonizing, pathologizing, destigmatizing, and deploying trauma-informed care in communities that have experienced oppression, right? So this group has, is a group that has a really audacious goal. And what was interesting, had a goal already embedded in it. So I took their action statement and I pulled out the second paragraph and made it a goal. And of course, they would create more goals and they would add more examples. And this is just an example. Again, I don't want to speak for that committee, but they have an action statement, right? And it's here addressing the total impact of generational multi-systemic trauma begins with an explicit rejection of the prevailing, I think this is epidemiological foundation created by economically privileged, heteronormative, Judeo-Christian men of Western European ancestry. Say that 10 times, on which trauma and its manifestations are defined. This foundation in which the wisdom of people outside the specific socio-demographic composition are both conceptually and explicitly disregarded, prevails in the structure of our present day institutions. To depathology of trauma involves a reorientation, how trauma and its manifestations are observed, perceived, and addressed, shifting from a lens of trauma as a consequence of personal deficit to a consequence of systemic oppression designed to weaken and mitigate Indigenous cultural assets. True destigmatization of trauma is inextricably connected with collective acknowledgement that everyone is on the spectrum of mental, emotional, psychological, and spiritual health. So this is their current action statement. And in their they also have this sentence about implementing effective trauma-informed efforts reflecting the racial, cultural, spiritual, and historical context. So I said, could we simplify the action statement, take that goal of making sure that trauma-informed efforts reflect racial, cultural, spiritual, and historical context. And then they also had in their action statement this commitment to creating a toolkit that educates us on colonialism. And so I took that very kind of expansive action statement, pulled out a goal that was embedded in the action statement, and actually also pulled out a project or strategy. This might not be the way that this, and I defer to them on what this will look like at the end, but also this is something
Hey, Tisha, your audio cut out.
So I kind of pull those things apart to put them in this template, in this format. So now this committee can decide whether this makes sense for them. And if they don't, of course, it's but it gives them kind of a more targeted action statement. And then their action statement, they can start to build up to 5. More than 5. preferably low side, 5 on the high side goals. And then for each goal, they're going to have 3 on the low side, recommended projects to achieve this goal, 7 on the high side. I think the sweet spot is 5 projects per goal that they would have aligned to their ultimate action statement. My final 2 words about this is just to remind you, this is about work that we all as a city can do. Those of us on the task force should see ourselves in this work and should have a place in moving the recommendations forward. You want to bring city government into this space. We want to bring the nonprofit community. We want to bring the faith-based community. We want to bring the higher ed community. We want to bring our school system into the community. We are all have to be working together on this goal of healing resiliency and addressing structural racism, right? And so your strategies and your goals should be thinking about how do you activate all of those assets. This is an assets-based, framework. So how do we activate all the many assets of Baltimore, not just city government? And then how do we see ourselves in it? Because ultimately, these are recommendations that we are making and that we have to be the champions for, and that we are in the game in moving these recommendations forward. So I know I've said a lot, but I hope I've been really clear, and I'm totally open to questions. How did I do, Councilman?
You did great. Super, super thoughtful presentation. That was perfect. Your audio came in and out just a little bit, but I think we all got exactly what you were about. So excellent. All right. So my question, Madam Director, is can these projects cost money? What if there's a budget associated? How do we think about money as it relates to this work?
So we talked about this a little bit in the very beginning, and yes, we can't expect that we're going to do this work without costs associated with it. What we're doing now is getting a sense of what the strategies should be. What are our goals? When you submit those strategies later in the process, what I'm recommending is that Councilman Cohen and I bring together the chairpersons of all of the committees to look at everybody's proposals and give feedback on those. And then we may narrow this some more to determine what are we really going to get behind. And then once we have that conversation with the collective task force, with some of the chairs, then we will go to the next step of budgeting. And so we don't want, at this stage, we don't want budget to be a barrier. We want to know your best thoughts. And Councilman Cohen is committed to finding the money if it's right thing to do. So I think to the budget, but at this point, we want to just get those great ideas out there for us to then come back to further refine. And then we'll talk about budgets. We'll talk about partnerships. We'll talk about, all kinds of ways to make this happen for implementation.
Yeah. And before just going right to Shauna, I would just say on that as well, which is, there is not like a set aside budget amount, just so that we're all clear. I see this as an organizing project, and how we organize ourselves around these different projects and initiatives. I'm of the belief that if there's a will, there's a way, and we collectively can find funding. Of course, the city is getting a big chunk of American Rescue Plan Act money, which is really supposed to go toward COVID relief. But if we have a project that fits, there is always that opportunity. So I just think all 30, however many of us, are now community organizers and are going to have to just figure out how to get all this done. There is no right or wrong answer. With that, Shauna?
First, I wanted to start with just feedback. Tisha, even though you were going in and out, I felt like it was very clear, and I appreciated how you did some of the work for my committee, because that's exactly what I was thinking, what you said. Thank you very much. But my question is about, and I may have missed this, my question is about timeline. How soon or how far out are we thinking? How soon are we thinking that any efforts would be put to actually execute? Because we're talking about measurability. I'm mostly motivated when I know exactly the time frame I'm working with, so that I can sort of think strategically in that regard. And so feedback regarding that would be great.
So different things will happen at different times. This is not a linear process. And do you mind going back to show the original timeline? And I also want to make sure that folks, I want to clarify, you don't have to decide the goals and then come back and do your projects. You can do one goal and then do your projects. You can let's do all 5 of our goals and come back, do the projects. This is really going to be based on how the group sees the task. So, it's come together and you all decide, let's do our 5 goals first, or let's do one goal and then let's do all of our projects, and then we'll move to the next goal. That's really up to the group in terms of how you get to your ultimate plan. To Shauna's question about timeline, some things are happening right now, right? So there may be things that you're going to put in your plan that you say, this is happening now. It's at a small scale. We want to take it to a large scale, or we think this just fits perfectly in what we're doing. So we're going to drop it in our plan, even though meetings have already started, and you might say this project is going to jump off in the next 90 days, right? Before the plan is finalized, because our plans aren't going to be final until this January timeline. Things you may have ideas for, and line from implementation might vary, right? What we're focused on is our timeline to create the plan. And once we accept those recommendations, we will put a timeline associated with each goal. So if the youth committee says that advocating for more dollars in rec and parks for these 21st century recreational centers is what we want to do, that might have a jump off date of January, because that's when the budget season starts in Annapolis, or, that's when there's the prime opportunity to get funding for that particular strategy. So there isn't a hard and fast date, Shauna, on the implementation. The only timelines we're beholden to right now is the timeline to create actual plan, and different projects and different strategies will have varying launch dates. This is not going to be like a linear process. We're going to seize every opportunity that comes available to us, and that means different start dates for different actions within the plan. I hope that's clear.
Got it.
Any other questions? William, I saw that you have a comment in the chat. Did you want to share that with everyone for context?
Yeah, thanks, Director Edwards. I think you said it when you mentioned the the idea of current or existing projects that are already going on, so that we don't have to necessarily reinvent the wheel. But there are some really important projects that are happening right now across the city, and in communities as well. And just building on those. So, but if we find that those are working, keep those going. Support those, because they already have some coalitions around things. There's so much action going on that it probably is not just I'm not looking for the easy way to go, but what's effective and sort of what's also efficient, because a lot of projects already have a lot of resources around them already, a lot of designated things. So I would even venture to say that, if we could really think about some action or goals or action from those goals that focus on existing as well as potentially new things that are happening on the horizon. So basically, really repeating kind of what you said and building on that.
That's absolutely correct.
Yeah. And one more thing, I think that we may say funding a lot, but I think that it's important to think about resources overall as we think about that.
Yeah, time, energy.
Yep, time, effort. Yep, all of
and
that.
Partner.
And the whole kit and caboodle.
I agree. All right, so Councilman Cohen and Ann, we have a little bit more than 10 minutes left. What do you think is the best? Do you want to do a quick check-in at the committee level? Do we want to continue to stay together? What do you think is the best use of? Is it 7 or 7? What time do we end? 7 or 7:30?
7 o'clock.
Okay, because I'm in a different time zone. I don't know what day of the week it is or what time it is. So, okay, 7 o'clock, is that correct?
7 o'clock, yep. Yeah, now you got us all wondering what time zone you're in.
I am in an undisclosed place in things that I would not put on social media, but having a really great time with my friends. So I'll just leave it at that.
All right.
So how do you think we should use the last 12 minutes?
I mean, I think it might be good to just do a quick check-in in the groups. I mean, I don't think we're going to be able to get in the work, but I think just a quick, if everybody wants to just say hey in their group, anything that has gone on in the last week or so, maybe we just end on that. And what do you think?
Yes, I think that's fine. So Zeke, what I heard you say is touching base in groups, regrouping. Do you want people to regroup collectively, or do you want people to leave from their groups?
No, I think let's just leave from our groups. I mean, I think we're good.
Okay. So I have put everyone into their breakout rooms by committee. Fingers crossed to have you all in the right committees this time. So I will go ahead and open those up. There are staff for each group that have a document. If you're at a place to take notes today, great. Policy group, you are the one caveat. I am putting your template for note taking in the chat here. You all stay here in this space though. You are not going to a room, you are streamed. So your document is there if you'd like to take notes. Otherwise, I'm going to open the rooms and folks can start to group there. For the policy group, I'm going to be here for just a minute to make sure people have gotten where they need to go. And then I'm going to go join the decolonizing group.
Great. Thank you so much, Ann.
So we're the one subcommittee that's cool enough to be on the live stream. Good for us.
This time, I try to rotate who's on the live stream. So you're not always on the live stream, but today you're on the live stream. So
I understand.
All right. All right. You guys can probably start to discuss. I'll try and get Nana Ama to where she needs to go if I can. And looks like everyone else except Tisha is where they need to be. So
thank you, Ann. Appreciate it.
That.
Nice. So how's everybody doing?
Real good.
Doing well, thank you.
Doing
I
great.
think
How about you?
school starts next week.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
Oh, I'm actually going to put this in the chat for everybody. I'll send it out to Anne as well. But we just released position descriptions for our youth environmental leadership internship program for the year. We're hiring 2 new kids to join the 3 that stayed on from last year. So let me make sure everybody has that.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, Abby. I'll go ahead and put our action statement in the chat box, just in case people need a refresher. So again, we've been working on these action statements for the last few meetings. And at this point, I think we've worked really well as a committee. I think we have a really strong action statement. I can read it out loud, and then we can start going from there with coming up with drafting goals. So our action statement for the policy subcommittee is that lived experiences show and research confirms that apartheid and trauma in Baltimore are caused by and remain unhealed as a result of local, state, and federal policy. Unjust policies such as disinvestment, marginalization, criminalization, hypersurveillance, and over-enforcement have produced staggering violence, apathy, poverty, abandonment, and instability. The work group will recommend strategies to disrupt and dismantle policies that cause and exacerbate trauma while introducing new policies that stabilize, repair, and heal our most impacted communities. So, reading that, having come up with that collective statement over the last few meetings, what are some goals that are jumping out to all of you?
Oh, housing. I guess I'm just calling up, I guess with these few minutes left, I'm just calling out some things. Housing. Oh.
Well, one thing that jumps out to me is, and I guess this probably won't shock anybody, but our relationship with the police. We talk about over enforcement and criminalization and surveillance and whatnot. So I don't think it's, again, any shock to think that we need to look at reallocating funds and services and responsibilities away from that agency and to other agencies.
Of course, I think this is probably a shared concern across the committees, probably, of course, policies surrounding, of course, like we did with the trauma care and the Trauma Act, being able to, I think that's going to be a shared kind of goal with all dealing with mental health. And I guess we could go further. I guess how we help disparities, some of the health disparities that will probably be inclusive of some of the social determinants, which I think most of us have already kind of begun to speak to. But housing, some health disparities as well, and access, and I guess that can take a look at quite a few areas.
Thank you. So just to summarize what I'm hearing so far, I'm hearing one goal, particularly around housing, mental health, as well as health access. I'm hearing possibly another goal that talks about more broadly sharing resources to make sure everybody's mental health is thriving, and then also some resources to perhaps broaden or expand the way we currently look at our relationship with police. And I heard Abby pointing out that our action statement does have, we do explicitly call out this criminalization, hyper-surveillance, and over-enforcement. So, hopefully trying to make sure that people in Baltimore don't feel like they're being criminalized or hyper-surveilled, or, that policies are being over-enforced, especially on the basis of somebody else's skin tone or, possible discrimination that might be happening. Are there any other keywords or goals that we want to call out at this stage before we start forming some of these into larger goals?
So I have two, and then one thought that sort of combines what Dr. Kevin was talking about with mental health and what Abby was talking about with over-policing, which is, I think, something in the space of how we respond to mental health crises. And as we're seeing across the country, I think, and in Baltimore, folks are really rethinking whether police officers alone are the best first responders when someone is having a mental or behavioral health crisis. And so I think there's something there. And I know that, BCRI, BSIT, like a bunch, there's a lot of thought, and part of the mayor's anti-violence plan is around bringing in more of a force that can respond through a mental health lens instead of with guns and handcuffs when someone's experiencing acute mental illness. So I want to put that out there. Also, two things. One, I think increasing civic participation, especially among communities that feel totally disconnected and feel abandoned. We talk in our thing about disinvestment, apathy, abandonment, instability. So I think really thinking about how we can increase civic participation. And then just also, I think about policies aligned with how do we become more trauma informed. I do think about what are the interventions that support families, such as is it paid sick leave? Is it universal pre-kindergarten or childcare, right? I think some of the guidance that I've seen from the CDC as it relates to trauma-informed policies is really about early intervention, early support, and support for strong and stable families.
One thing I find myself thinking is that we talk in our action statement about dismantling policies that cause trauma. And you talked about, examples from the CDC and whatnot. Do we feel like we know that we have, I know that the whole point of this group is to bring together the brain trust, but I wonder if there's some process of, outreach to community to uncover things we might not be thinking of, like what policies of city governments have, or state government for that matter, if that's within our purview, have harmed you, have caused you or your family trauma. Be interesting maybe to see what people would say.
I like that. I like that. I like that. And also I was thinking also about, as a social worker, of course, I'm very concerned in education that there's just not a lot of social workers in schools. And a lot of this work has to be placed on teachers and others. When you're looking at in some schools, you're talking about just two social workers to 400 people. That's asinine to me. And it continues to be a travesty given the biopsychosocial issues that most of our kids have to navigate. And social workers and other clinical professionals.
Totally agree with that. Just before we jump, because I know it's 7. Yeah, I just want to big up also Abby's point around maybe part of this is research, listening, that one of our goals could be built around a listening and research campaign.
I like that.
All right, 7 o'clock. It's great to see y'all. Kevin had a great conversation with one of your colleagues today, Dr. Wilbin, about that idea I was telling you about.
Oh,
She was
phenomenal.
Yeah,
Phenomenal.
yeah. She speaks very highly of you as well.
I'm gonna pay her when I get finished.
She said she taught you everything you know. So
Everything I knew she was gonna say it. I knew it.
okay.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good evening.
All right. See y'all.
Always good to be on the line with you all. Have a good night.
You too, Abby.
Bye-bye.